Then ask the right question and do your job correctly.
You think because people know your name, you can stand wherever you want?
That is not what is happening here.
What I see is someone expecting everyone else to cover for him.
What you turned this into is an unlawful
Officer Miller thought he was the most powerful man in the room until he grabbed the arm of the one man in that building who could end his career with facts, witnesses, and the law. At a high-profile charity gala, he pushed past every warning, every correction, every chance to slow down. He had no idea he was detaining a black federal judge on property tied to the judge's own foundation. And once he put hands on him in front of donors, cameras, and city leadership, the whole thing stopped being a scene and turned into a career-killing event. Before this goes further, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about abuse of power, public accountability, and people who stay calm while somebody else self-destructs, hit like and subscribe. This wasn't some vague misunderstanding in a dark parking lot. That's what made it so bad. This happened under chandeliers, valley lights, security cameras, phone cameras, and a whole room full of people who understood status, optics, and liability. The second they saw Miller's tone was off. The man he stopped was Judge Malcolm Ellison, a federal judge with a reputation that reached past the courthouse. Late 50s, controlled, careful. Not the kind of man who needed to announce himself twice. He was one of the featured honorees that night. The gala itself raised money for legal aid clinics, scholarship funds, and youth mentorship programs. Half the city's money was there. The other half of the city's influence was there. Corporate sponsors, nonprofit boards, senior attorneys, a few elected officials, local media. Plenty of people who knew exactly who Malcolm Ellison was the second they saw him step out of the black sedan near the side entrance. And that was the first thing Miller got wrong. He looked at the car, not the context. The estate hosting the event had a circular drive in front, a secured service lane to the side, and a restricted access point near the garden entrance. Event staff had been moving vehicles with military-level coordination for over an hour. Valets had lists. Private security had lists. The foundation staff had lists. Everybody working that entrance knew the flow. Miller didn't care about the flow. He cared that he saw a black man near a restricted lane beside an expensive car. And in his head, that was enough to take over. He'd been assigned outside traffic support. Simple job. Keep the perimeter clean, coordinate with private security, don't freelance, don't create problems. Basic stuff. But Miller wasn't built for basic stuff when he thought he had an audience. He liked taking control fast. He liked the posture of enforcement. The Bodycam later showed it clearly. He walked up already convinced he was about to correct somebody. Judge Ellison had just stepped out of the vehicle and was speaking to an event coordinator about timing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't trying to slip in anywhere. He had his formal invitation packet, credential badge, and phone in hand. Staff were already greeting him by name. Miller cut straight through that. He demanded identification in the kind of voice officers use when they want the whole area to know they're in charge, not firm, aggressive. He framed it like the judge had no business being where he stood. Then he started talking about unauthorized vehicle placement and restricted access, like he'd caught somebody trying something slick. Right there, the night could have gone 10 different ways. That's the important part. Miller had exits, plenty of them. An event coordinator immediately told him Judge Ellison was expected. A member of the private security team stepped in and explained that the vehicle had clearance for temporary drop-off. One of the valet supervisors tried to show Miller the access list. He brushed all of that aside. Fast. Too fast. That tells you what this was. He wasn't investigating. He was asserting. Judge Ellison answered him the way disciplined people answer men looking for a reaction, calmly. He identified himself. He explained he was a guest of honor. He pointed out that staff could verify everything in seconds. Miller treated every word like resistance. The crowd nearby started noticing because tone travels faster than facts. Guests at the outer edge of the reception area turned towards his driveway. Conversations stalled. A local news producer standing near the entrance lifted her phone. One donor did the same, then another. People do that now. They record first and sort it out later. And honestly, in a situation like this, that's exactly what saved the truth. Miller moved closer. Too close. He started giving commands instead of asking questions. He said the judge needed to stop talking and comply. He waved off the badge packet before really looking at it. He ignored the coordinator again. Then he said something that shifted the whole thing from ugly to dangerous. He suggested Judge Ellison was acting like he belonged there because people around him were covering for him. That was the line. That was where the room changed. Up to that point, some people still looked confused. Maybe this officer was just keyed up. Maybe he'd made a bad read and was about to fix it. But once he implied that the black man standing in formal wear at a gala in his own city couldn't possibly belong unless somebody was making excuses for him, the confusion started draining out of the air. People understood what they were watching. Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture back. He simply repeated who he was, stated that staff had already confirmed it, and told Miller he needed to slow down before he created a legal problem for himself and for the department. That should have landed. It didn't. Some men hear a warning and take it. Miller heard one and got offended. He asked for a physical ID again, sharper this time. Judge Ellison reached towards his inside jacket pocket slowly, carefully, exactly how any sane person would want it done during a police encounter. Miller reacted like the movement itself justified escalation. He ordered the judge to stop reaching. Staff started talking over each other. One Foundation board member stepped forward and identified the judge by title. Another guest, a retired state appellate judge, called out that Miller needed to stand down and verify before doing anything stupid. Miller snapped back that nobody there was going to tell him how to do his job. That one mattered too, because now it wasn't about confusion. It was ego. He was no longer trying to determine who Malcolm Ellison was. He was trying to win in public, and Judge Ellison knew it. You could hear it in the even way he answered. He told Miller again that the property, the event staff, and the guest credentials would all confirm the same thing. He told him witnesses were recording. He told him there was still time to step back and correct course. Miller didn't step back. He squared up, put a hand near his cuffs, started giving the kind of clipped commands officers use when they want instant submission. Around them, people stopped pretending this would settle itself. Phones stayed up. A city council member moved away and started calling somebody. Private security looked trapped, as they knew intervening physically against a uniformed officer would make it worse. The valet line froze. Even the music inside the gala felt irrelevant at that point. Everybody saw the same thing. One man was keeping control. The other just had a badge and a bad temper. Then Miller told Judge Ellison to put his hands behind his back. Judge Ellison didn't argue. He didn't step back. He didn't perform for the crowd. He did the exact opposite of what Miller seemed to want. He stayed still and kept talking in the same controlled tone, telling the officer that this detention had no legal basis, that multiple people had already confirmed his identity, and that Miller was escalating in front of a recorded audience. Miller went ahead anyway. He grabbed Ellison's wrist, pulled his arm behind his back, and pushed him into the position. Hard enough to make people shout. Not hard enough to leave the kind of injury that would distract from the bigger issue. Just the kind of force arrogant officers use when they want pain and humiliation without looking out of control on paper. That's how men like him think. They think in reports before they think in consequences. Then the handcuffs clicked. That was it. The whole event changed in one sound. The crowd had been tense before. Now it was angry. You could feel that shift immediately. Guests moved closer, not farther away. Phones went higher. Staff stopped trying to be polite and started speaking over one another. Several people identified Judge Ellison again, louder this time with title, name, and role. One board member told Miller he was handcuffing the Host Foundation's principal honoree. A retired judge told him he was making a catastrophic mistake. A private security supervisor tried one last time to show him the credential list, and the event clearance log. Miller ignored all of it because he'd already crossed the line in his own mind. Once officers like that commit in public, they stop thinking about whether they're right. They start thinking about how not to look weak. So he doubled down. He started talking about failure to comply, obstruction, restricted access. He threw out words that sounded official but didn't match the facts anybody could see. That happens a lot when bad policing gets exposed in real time. The officer starts building a case backward. First comes the force, then comes the excuse. Judge Ellison stood there in cuffs, jacket slightly twisted, face still composed. He told Miller very plainly that he was on private property connected to the event, that he had been identified by multiple witnesses, and that Miller had now added unlawful restraint to an already baseless stop. He also made it clear that every second after that point increased the department's liability. And Miller still didn't stop. He made a remark about how everybody suddenly had a title when police showed up. Then he questioned whether Ellison was actually supposed to be inside at all. He said it like he'd caught the room in a lie. That was the mask-off moment. No room left for confusion after that. He wasn't sorting out a security issue. He had decided this black man in formal wear did not fit his idea of who belonged at that event, and he treated that assumption like evidence. The people around him knew it. They heard it. So did the cameras. One local reporter had moved close enough to catch the whole exchange cleanly on video. Another guest was streaming to a private account that later got clipped and spread everywhere. The Bodycam got it too, which made the department's first attempt at damage control dead on arrival before sunrise. Miller finally demanded physical identification again. This time, a Foundation staff member stepped in with Judge Ellison's credential packet already open. A federal courthouse ID was visible. So was the gala credential with Ellison's photo, title, and guest of honor designation. Miller looked at it, really looked at it, and you could see the exact second the ground shifted under him. He froze. Not for long. Maybe a second. Maybe two. But long enough for everybody around him to know he just realized exactly who he had handcuffed. Judge Malcolm Ellison, United States District Judge, honored guest, identified repeatedly before the cuffs ever went on. Miller's posture changed right there. It wasn't remorse. It was panic trying to hide inside authority. He started asking clipped questions nobody needed answered anymore. He wanted to know why nobody had made it clear. That lie didn't survive 3 feet of distance. Half the people standing there had done exactly that, repeatedly. He wanted to pivot into confusion now because certainty had just become toxic. Judge Ellison didn't let him rewrite the scene. Still cuffed, he laid it out in order. He stated that Miller had initiated an unsupported detention. He stated that staff and witnesses had verified identity and authorization multiple times. He stated that Miller had used physical restraint without probable cause, had ignored available confirming information, and had continued after explicit warning, calm, clean, precise. He wasn't speaking like a man trying to win an argument. He was speaking like a man building a record in real time. That's what broke Miller more than the title did. Not just who Ellison was, how he was handling it. Sirens didn't flood in. This wasn't that kind of scene. What arrived instead was worse for Miller. Supervisors. A patrol sergeant got there first, after calls from event security, and a city official inside the gala reached command staff. He took one look at the crowd, the phones, the cuffs, and Ellison's credentials in a staff member's hand, and his face changed immediately. He pulled Miller aside. Quick, sharp. Too late. Then an assistant chief arrived from inside the event itself. He had been attending the gala in a suit, not a uniform, and he knew Judge Ellison personally. That made the whole thing even uglier. There was no buffer anymore, no maybe, no ambiguity. Just a senior department official walking into a live disaster caused by one patrol officer who refused every off-ramp. The assistant chief ordered the cuffs removed at once. Miller did it, hands suddenly less steady now. Ellison rubbed one wrist once, adjusted his jacket, and stayed exactly as composed as he'd been from the start. That made Miller look even smaller. Everybody there saw it. The assistant chief started apologizing. The sergeant started separating witnesses. Somebody from the mayor's office had already arrived at the edge of the driveway. Phones were still recording. Nobody trusted the department to summarize this honestly anymore, and honestly, they were right not to. Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply stated that this incident would be documented in full, that all video had to be preserved, and that nobody at the scene should mistake removal of the cuffs for removal of liability. Then he looked straight at Miller and made the point that ended the encounter for good. He told him authority meant nothing without judgment, and tonight he'd shown he had neither. That was the end of the confrontation, not the end of Miller's problem, the start of it. By midnight, the department already knew this wasn't containable. There were too many angles: guest video, security footage, body cam, valet area cameras, phone clips from donors, staff, reporters, even 2 city officials standing near the entrance. Miller had picked the worst possible place to act like nobody would check him. A public street would have been bad. A charity gala packed with lawyers, judges, media people, and people who understood evidence. Career suicide. The first department statement came out before sunrise, and it was exactly the kind of weak, defensive language people are sick of hearing. It called the incident an active scene under review. It said the full context was still being gathered. It praised professionalism while avoiding the actual facts. That lasted a few hours. Then the Bodycam clip leaked. That changed everything. The video showed Miller brushing off staff. It showed witnesses identifying Judge Ellison more than once. It showed the federal credential. It showed the event pass. It showed Miller escalating after he'd already been given the information he needed. Worst of all for him, it showed the tone. People always focus on force, but tone tells the truth faster. He didn't sound cautious. He sounded certain. Certain in the dumbest possible way. Like he had decided what kind of man Ellison was before the interaction even started. By morning, the clip was everywhere. Legal analysts broke down the stop frame by frame. Civil rights groups picked it up. Former prosecutors went on local and national programs, explaining that the problem wasn't just a bad arrest. It was a chain of bad decisions. Unsupported detention, refusal to verify, physical restraint without a valid basis, public humiliation. Then the attempt to justify it after the fact. That last part buried him, because Miller had filed a preliminary report before the full footage surfaced, and the report didn't match the video. He wrote that Judge Ellison had been evasive. He implied staff had interfered before identity could be confirmed. He suggested the detention happened during a fluid security situation. It was nonsense. The footage shredded it line by line. That's when this stopped being only about misconduct and became about dishonesty, too. Departments can sometimes drag their feet on arrogance. Dishonesty on body cam is harder to carry. Prosecutors hate officers who poison cases. Command staff know it. City attorneys know it. Once the report fell apart, Miller stopped being just a liability in this incident. He became a liability in every case he'd ever touched. Then internal affairs started pulling his history. That's where it got worse. Not because they found one prior complaint. They found a pattern. Several complaints from previous stops. Escalation during minor encounters. Dismissive treatment of black drivers. Repeated notes from supervisors about poor judgment under perceived challenge. A prior incident where a lieutenant recommended remedial de-escalation training. Another complaint had been closed without full follow-up after body cam footage was marked inconclusive. One warning, then another, then another. Nothing big enough alone to force the issue. Together, it looked obvious. The department hadn't created Miller's ego, but it had tolerated it. That part mattered to Judge Ellison more than Miller's embarrassment ever did. He didn't turn the thing into a personal revenge campaign. He treated it like what it was: a public example of what happens when an officer with a badge, weak discipline, and racial assumptions gets too comfortable being protected by the institution around him. Within 24 hours, the mayor held a press conference. She didn't soften it. She said the conduct on video was unacceptable, humiliating, and legally indefensible. She confirmed an outside review. She also made it clear the city would not hide behind vague wording while the evidence sat in public view. That statement told everybody something simple. The department had lost political cover. 2 days later, Miller was suspended. A week after that, he was terminated. The official grounds were broad enough to hold up and specific enough to destroy him. Conduct unbecoming, unlawful detention, failure to follow identification and verification procedure, discriminatory conduct, false and misleading reporting, violation of department de-escalation policy. Once dishonesty went on the record, his chances of working serious law enforcement again dropped through the floor. Then the state certification board opened decertification proceedings. That was the real end. A fired officer can sometimes bounce around. A decertified one usually can't. Not in any serious agency that wants to survive public records requests. The civil lawsuit landed right after. Judge Ellison's legal team didn't file something flashy. They filed something disciplined: federal civil rights claims, unlawful seizure, equal protection violations, municipal liability arguments tied to prior notice and failure to act on complaint history, negligent retention, public humiliation damages, preservation demands for every piece of footage, radio traffic, dispatch record, supervisory message, and complaint file touching Miller's history. It was the kind of lawsuit that doesn't just ask for money. It asks who knew what, when they knew it, and why they kept the wrong man on the street. The city tried the usual early posture: regret without admission, respect for the process, quiet talk about resolution. But the facts were awful and everybody knew it. The judge hadn't mouthed off. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't been hard to identify. The crowd had done half the officer's job for him, and Miller still forced the outcome he wanted. A jury would have seen that in about 10 minutes. So the city settled. The number got attention, but the non-monetary terms hit harder. Mandatory outside review of high complaint officers, tighter preservation rules for body cam and event footage, new requirements for identity verification before physical detention in non-violent encounters, expanded bias review triggers, better supervisor intervention standards, mandatory psychological screening after repeated escalation complaints. Not because politicians suddenly became moral heroes, because the footage made denial too expensive. Judge Ellison pushed further after the settlement. He worked with state lawmakers, bar associations, and judicial committees on a package of accountability reforms. Nothing dramatic. No speech-making nonsense. Just practical fixes. Stronger complaint pattern review. Faster flags for officers who repeatedly escalate low-level encounters. Clearer decertification standards where misconduct and dishonesty overlap. More serious training on constitutional stops, bias recognition, and public-facing restraint. Boring to some people, effective in real life. That's how real change usually looks. Not loud. Structural. As for Miller, his name became the example nobody wanted attached to a department. His firing stayed public. The certification action moved forward. His report-writing credibility was gone. Prosecutors didn't want him. Agencies didn't want him. City lawyers definitely didn't want him. He'd walked into that gala thinking a badge made him the final authority in any space he entered. A few minutes of ego proved the opposite. In a modern system with cameras, records, and people willing to fight, authority without judgment doesn't protect a man. It exposes him. Judge Ellison went back to work. That part matters. He didn't let the incident become his identity. He stayed on the bench. He kept his dignity. He turned one officer's public failure into a case study on discipline, oversight, and what happens when somebody calm knows the law better than the man trying to control him. And that's really the story. Not that Miller didn't know who he was grabbing, that was the beginning. The real problem was that he thought it wouldn't matter. He thought he could force first, explain later, and the system would stretch around him like it always had. That night, it didn't. So, what would you have done if you were standing there, watching it happen in real time? Have you ever seen somebody with authority push too far? Because they assumed nobody would challenge them? Put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who still thinks professionalism in policing is optional. And subscribe for more stories about power, accountability, and the exact moment arrogant people realize the room is turned on them.
I need ID from both of you right now.
For what?
Because you're in a restricted area.
Restricted to residents. We live here. This is the gate credential.
Ma'am, I'm talking to him.
You came up like we're doing something wrong. What exactly is this?
Possible trespassing.
Trespassing?
In our
Prove it.
community.
Resin tags on the windshield, gate
on my
passes.
wife's phone.
He picked the wrong family to intimidate. A patrol officer rolled into a private residential park, saw a black family unloading food and toys near a picnic table, and decided they didn't belong there. He pushed it into a detention before he checked a single basic fact. What he didn't know was that the family he was pressuring had a direct line to his own supervisor, and that supervisor was already heading to the scene. That's what made this one different. Not rumor, not half a story. A clean abuse of power case with cameras, dispatch audio, gate access records, and Bodycam all backing the same timeline. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about authority, getting checked with facts instead of excuses, like the video and subscribe. This happened inside a gated HOA community outside a growing suburb. The park sat behind a coded entry gate and was reserved for residents and their guests. The signs at the entrance said that plainly. The gate logs tracked access. Cameras covered the entrance, the parking area, and most of the common space. It wasn't public property, and that point ended up mattering more than anything else. The family at the center of it was the Brooks family. Nia Brooks had come to the park with her husband Andre, their 2 kids, and a few bags for a late afternoon cookout. They weren't sneaking around. They weren't near anybody's house. They were at one of the picnic areas residents used all the time. They had entered through the gate legally, parked in the right area, and started setting up. Officer Ryan Kessler rolled in a few minutes later. Kessler had a pattern. He liked command more than he liked facts. On calls where the answer wasn't obvious, he often acted first and corrected later, which is a dangerous habit in police work. Most of the time, that kind of officer gets away with it because regular people don't know the rules well enough to push back, or they know the rules and decide it's not worth the trouble. Nia Brooks was not built like that. Kessler got out of his unit and moved toward the family, like he had already decided what this was. He asked what they were doing there, then turned the contact aggressive almost immediately. He said the area was restricted. Nia explained that yes, it was restricted, which was why residents used a gate code to enter. Andre pointed to the resident access tag on the windshield and started to show the digital gate credential on his phone. Kessler didn't slow down. He kept pressing the same point as if they hadn't answered him. He wanted ID. He wanted proof they belonged there. He wanted it on his terms, in his order, with everybody responding the way he expected. That's where the stop went bad. Nia gave him the street name inside the community. Andre told him which building they were connected to. The access tag was right there on the vehicle. The phone showed resident entry credentials. All of that should have led to a basic verification. Instead, Kessler treated each answer like a challenge to his authority. He told them they were being detained while he investigated possible trespassing. That was the first major overreach. He was in a private resident-only area with people who had already shown multiple signs they had lawful access, and he still pushed forward as if the detention itself would force the truth out. It was backwards policing. He should have verified first. He chose control first. The kids picked up on the tone right away. One stopped near the playground and came back toward the table. The other stayed close to Nia. That changed the whole feel of the scene. It wasn't just a bad stop anymore. It was a uniformed officer creating fear in front of children over something he could have resolved in minutes. Andre stayed measured. He tried to keep the exchange narrow and practical. Nia did something smarter. She took out her phone and started recording. That mattered a lot. Kessler noticed it and got even more rigid. He warned her about interfering, even though she was standing back and documenting from her own spot. She kept recording. She also kept her tone controlled, which made the footage stronger. There was no shouting match to hide behind later, no mutual chaos. The video showed one side trying to explain and one side refusing to process anything that didn't fit the suspicion he had already decided on. Kessler radioed dispatch and described the contact as suspicious people in a restricted private area. That phrasing shaped the call in real time. It made the situation sound cleaner for him than it looked on camera. Then he asked for backup. That turned out to be the mistake that ended him. Before backup was even assigned, Nia had already texted her brother-in-law, Sergeant David Hale. She didn't do it to pull rank. She did it because the stop had crossed out of normal police contact and into something that looked personal, sloppy, and dangerous. Hale was on duty nearby. He saw the message, heard the radio traffic, and understood fast that one of his officers was building a bad scene. Back at the park, Kessler kept pushing. He told Andre to move away from the table and stand near the SUV. He told Nia to stay where she was. He acted like ordinary movement inside their own gathering was suspicious. Every choice he made showed the same thing. He didn't want clarification. He wanted compliance first, explanation later. Then he said the line that changed the whole case. He remarked that people always had a story ready when they got caught somewhere they weren't supposed to be. That told everybody exactly how he was seeing them. Not as residents to verify. Not as a family in a private park. As people he had already placed on the wrong side of the line before he checked the facts. That one statement later mattered inside the investigation because it exposed the mindset behind everything that came before and after it. Nia didn't take the bait. She kept filming. Andre kept his hands visible and stayed calm because he understood the risk. Kessler was in that dangerous stage where an officer starts defending his first bad decision by stacking more bad decisions on top of it. Then the backup unit came through the gate. Kessler turned toward it, expecting support. Sergeant David Hale stepped out, looked across the park, and recognized the family immediately. Nia was his wife's sister. Andre was holding himself together in front of his kids. The phone was recording. Kessler was standing there with detention language already used, a weak trespass theory, and no clean explanation for why he had ignored the access indicators right in front of him. That was the second everything changed. Kessler saw Hale's face and understood right there that he had walked himself into the worst possible version of this stop. Not because he had detained the wrong people by accident, because he had done it carelessly, on camera, inside a private residential space. And now his own sergeant was looking at the whole mess in real time. Sergeant David Hale did not need a long briefing. He looked at Nia, looked at Andre, looked at the kids. Then he looked at Officer Ryan Kessler standing there, like he still had control of the scene. Hale already had enough in front of him to know this was bad. The phone was up. The gate was behind them. The resident tag was on the SUV. His own family was being treated like intruders in a park they had lawful access to. Kessler started talking first. He tried to frame it as a suspicious person stop inside a restricted area. He said he was still sorting out whether they belonged there. He made it sound procedural, clean, reasonable. Hale cut straight through that. He asked what legal basis Kessler had for detention after being shown resident access indicators. He asked whether dispatch had confirmed any trespass complaint tied to that family. He asked whether the HOA had requested enforcement action. He asked whether Kessler had verified the address, the gate credential, or the vehicle access tag before escalating the stop. Kessler didn't have good answers because there weren't any. That's what made the scene so ugly. He wasn't trapped by some complicated legal issue. He had ignored the easy checks. He had skipped the boring, correct part of the job and gone right to pressure. Officers do that when they want control more than accuracy. Hale then turned to Nia and Andre, got a fast confirmation of what had happened, and looked back at Kessler. By then, the picture was complete. Kessler had approached aggressively. He had used detention language. He had threatened arrest. He had treated clear signs of lawful access like they meant nothing. He had done all of that in front of 2 children and on camera. That ended it. Hale told Kessler to step away from the family and stop speaking to them. Not suggest. Told him. Kessler froze for a second, then tried one more time to defend himself. He started talking about officer safety, restricted spaces, and suspicious behavior. It sounded weak because it was weak. Hale wasn't buying any of it. He told him again to step back and keep quiet. The power shift was instant. A minute earlier, Kessler had been trying to run the entire scene through force of tone. Now he was standing there, getting checked by the one person on scene who outranked him, knew policy cold, and had zero reason to protect sloppy police work. That's the part people notice in footage like this. Aggressive officers usually look invincible right up until someone with actual authority makes them explain themselves. Hale asked to see the body cam status. It was active. Good for the case, bad for Kessler. He asked dispatch over the radio to note a supervisory intervention and preserve all related communications. He requested another unit not for backup now, but for scene handling and evidence control. That mattered. Hale wasn't just angry. He was already building the record correctly. Then came the part that turned this from a bad stop into a career-ending event. Hale relieved Kessler of field authority on the spot. Not a movie-style firing. Realer than that. Worse, too. He ordered Kessler out of enforcement contact for the rest of the shift. He took him off the scene. He directed the incoming unit to assume control and maintain separation. He told Kessler he would not initiate any more stops, speak to the family again, or write the primary version of the incident. He also ordered preservation of the body cam file, the dispatch traffic, and any notes tied to the contact. In plain terms, Kessler had just lost his power right there in public. And Hale didn't stop there. Kessler had been carrying corporal-style field responsibility that shift, a small status bump tied to staffing coverage. Hale removed it immediately. No more acting senior role, no more scene command, no more pretending experience covered for judgment. In front of another unit, in front of the family, with the whole thing being recorded, Kessler got stripped back to exactly what he had earned in that moment. No discretion, no trust, no room to spin it. That hit harder than yelling ever would have. Hale kept his voice controlled. That made it sting. He told Kessler he had detained lawful occupants in a private residential area without proper verification, escalated after being presented with access indicators, and kept pushing after the stop should have been over. He told him he had damaged public trust, exposed the department to liability, and created a record that would now go straight to review. Kessler tried to speak again. Hale shut that down too. He told him this was no longer a debate. It was an investigation. That line mattered because it marked the exact point where Kessler stopped being the officer shaping the contact and became the subject of it. The incoming officer arrived and took over the scene perimeter. Hale made sure the family was no longer being detained in any form. He apologized clearly. No vague language, no department speak. He told them the stop should not have gone that way. He told them the footage and records would be preserved. He also made it clear that if they filed a formal complaint, it would attach to a supervisor-initiated review already in motion. That was smart. It showed them this wasn't going to disappear into some locked drawer, unless they fought for 6 months. Andre finally got room to breathe. Nia kept recording. Good call again. The strongest parts of these cases usually come after the confrontation, when everybody expects the camera to go down and the institution to close ranks. Hale did the opposite. He acted like a supervisor who understood that transparency was the only move left. Then he asked for HOA security contact information and gate log preservation. Another smart move. Because once you know a stop is rotten, you lock down every neutral source before somebody can't locate it later. The gate entry records would show lawful access. The camera footage would show how the family entered and behaved before Kessler arrived. Dispatch audio would show how he framed the stop. His own body cam would show the rest. He had built the case against himself from 4 different angles. Kessler knew it too. People like him usually keep pushing until the second the paperwork becomes real. Then the attitude changes. Fast. Not because they suddenly understand the public harm, because they finally understand personal consequences. Kessler had that look now. Still stiff. Still trying to hold on to some pride. But he knew the stop was dead. The justification was dead, and his sergeant was not going to rescue him. Before leaving the scene, Hale gave him one final instruction. He told him to return to station under supervision, remain available for statement, and not discuss the contact with anyone except command staff or investigators. Standard order. Serious meaning. Kessler got back into his unit with no control left, no authority on scene, no good story. Just a body cam full of bad judgment and a supervisor who had seen enough. As for the family, the worst of it was over, but the damage had already been done. Their kids had watched a uniformed officer treat their parents like suspects in a place they had every right to be. That doesn't disappear because a sergeant shows up and fixes the paperwork. That kind of thing stays with people. That's why stops like this matter even when nobody gets arrested. The abuse is in the humiliation, the threat, the message. You do not belong until I say so. That was Kessler's whole approach, and it collapsed the second somebody serious measured it against facts. Hale's last comment at the park was simple. He told Kessler that authority did not excuse ignoring the law. That was the end of the roadside power trip. The paper trail was just getting started. After the park incident, the real damage started. Sergeant David Hale filed the first report that same night. He laid it out plainly. Officer Ryan Kessler had detained a family inside a private residential park without doing basic verification. He had ignored clear signs that they belonged there. He had threatened arrest, pushed the stop in front of 2 children, and kept going after the situation should have ended. Hale also included Kessler's remark about people always having a story ready when they got caught somewhere they didn't belong. That line mattered because it showed how he had judged the family before he checked the facts. By the next morning, the department had everything it needed. There was Kessler's body camera. There was Nia Brooks's phone video. There was dispatch audio. There were gate records and security cameras from the Homeowners Association, or HOA. All of it pointed in the same direction. The gate logs showed the Brooks family had entered legally. The video showed them acting normally before Kessler arrived. The body cam showed him turning a routine contact into a detention. The radio traffic showed how he dressed it up as suspicious activity instead of what it really was, a bad stop built on assumptions. That's why Internal Affairs moved quickly in early 2026. Investigators reviewed the footage, interviewed the family, checked Kessler's report, and started looking at his past contacts. That's where the case got worse for him. This wasn't the first time he had escalated first and sorted facts out later. Earlier complaints had not gone far. Some people never filed, some had no video, some gave up because they assumed the department would protect him. This time there was too much evidence, and his record came back with it. The violations stacked up fast. Unlawful detention, harassment, abuse of police authority, failure to de-escalate, improper trespass enforcement on private residential property, misleading dispatch framing, conduct that damaged public trust. That list alone put him in serious trouble. The body cam made it worse because it showed he had chances to fix the stop and refused to take them. The Brooks family hired a civil rights lawyer within days. That was the right move. Their attorney sent preservation notices immediately. No footage could disappear. No audio could go missing. No one could later claim records were incomplete. Every part of that stop got locked down. Then came the civil claim. The argument was simple and strong. A black family with lawful access to a private residential park had been treated like trespassers by an officer who ignored obvious proof, escalated without cause, and used detention as pressure instead of doing his job correctly. The harm was not just inconvenience. It was humiliation, fear, and the message sent to those children while their parents were being treated like they did not belong in their own community. The city's lawyers saw the problem right away. Kessler had no clean defense. He tried anyway. He said he was being cautious. He said restricted access areas required extra attention. He said he was trying to confirm whether the family had lawful entry. That argument fell apart because he had easy ways to confirm it from the start. The resident tag was visible. The gate credential was available. The address could have been checked. Instead of verifying first, he detained first. That decision sat at the center of the whole case. While Kessler tried to save himself, Hale's conduct went the other way. Investigators found that Hale had acted properly once he arrived. He ended the detention, removed Kessler from field authority, preserved the evidence, and documented the stop without trying to protect his officer. That mattered. A lot of departments talk about integrity. Hale actually showed it. He didn't circle the wagons. He shut the scene down and made sure the records stayed clean. A few weeks later, Internal Affairs finished the investigation. The recommendation was termination. No soft landing, no quiet transfer, no extra training package to calm the public down. Termination. The department accepted it. Kessler was fired and referred for state certification review. That part followed him beyond that agency. Once an officer is tied to unlawful detention and a dishonest version of events, other departments notice. Prosecutors notice too. His name became a liability, and that usually ends a law enforcement career. It did here. The civil case ended in a settlement. The amount stayed confidential, but the Brooks family received compensation, and the department agreed to policy changes. That said enough. Agencies don't rewrite procedures unless they know the case against them is strong. Those changes were specific. Officers now had to verify resident access indicators before using trespass detention inside gated residential communities, unless there was a real safety threat. That included checking tags, gate logs, access credentials, and address information. Supervisors had to review disputed private property stops more closely. Dispatch wording also came under review, because officers should not be able to turn weak assumptions into stronger calls just by how they describe them on the radio. That part matters beyond this one story. Bad police work often starts small. A tone, a label, an officer deciding he already knows who belongs and who doesn't. Then the stop grows around that bad first decision. Kessler did exactly that, and cameras caught him doing it. For the Brooks family, there was some justice, but not a clean ending. They were validated. The department admitted the stop had gone wrong. They got compensation. They got policy change. But their kids still saw a uniformed officer treat their parents like intruders in a place where they had every right to be. That doesn't disappear because paperwork later comes out in their favor. Still, they handled it the right way. They stayed calm. They recorded. They did not give Kessler the angry reaction he was trying to pull out of them. They let the facts speak, and the facts hit hard. And Hale did what a real supervisor is supposed to do. He did not protect the badge over the truth. He protected the truth first. That's leadership. Rare enough that people remember it when they see it. In the end, this case became a warning inside the department and a lesson outside it. One officer tried to force authority where he had no legal ground. He picked a family he thought he could push around. Instead, he created a case with witnesses, video, records, legal exposure, and a supervisor who refused to cover for him. That decision cost him his authority, his job, and his future in law enforcement. What would you have done in that situation? Have you ever seen someone in authority keep pushing after the facts were already clear? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share the story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
I'm not buying that. Step away from the vehicle.
I already told you what this is. Federal assignment. You can verify it.
That plate doesn't come back right.
Because it's not a regular public registration. Call the contact chain I gave you.
You think flashing a badge wallet settles this?
No, verification settles.
As far as I'm concerned, this could be a stolen car with
Then
fake
slow
paper.
down and check it before you do something.
A county sheriff thought he had caught a car thief. He was wrong. The driver was a black FBI agent in a federal vehicle, and the sheriff ignored every chance to verify it before turning the stop into a public arrest. That decision didn't just blow up the scene on the roadside. It opened the door to a federal investigation that would later tear through his office. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about abuse of power getting exposed by Bodycam, dispatch audio, and hard evidence, like the video and subscribe. This started with Special Agent Jordan Cole and Sheriff Wade Garrison. Cole had worked federal cases long enough to know how traffic stops could go. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't loud. He didn't play games with local police. That night he was driving a bureau-issued SUV back through Pine County after a work assignment connected to an active investigation. The vehicle wasn't flashy. That was the point. It looked like a clean, late-model civilian SUV with low-profile government registration tied to federal use. Garrison had been sheriff for years. Small county, strong local image. He liked being the final word in his jurisdiction. Deputies under him were used to following his lead, even when his judgment got ahead of the facts. That mattered later, because this stop didn't go bad from confusion alone. It went bad because Garrison decided very early that he wasn't going to be corrected. The initial reason for the stop looked ordinary on paper. Suspicious vehicle, registration issue, possible mismatch. Something vague enough to justify lights in a county where people rarely challenged the sheriff's office. Cole pulled over without delay, no chase, no drama. From there, it should have been simple. Cole gave identification. He presented federal credentials. He explained that the SUV was assigned for bureau use and that local databases didn't always return clean, public-facing information on those vehicles. He also gave Garrison the path to verify everything through the proper federal contact chain. That should have slowed the stop down and shifted it into confirmation mode. It didn't. Garrison looked at the credentials and immediately treated them like a story instead of evidence. Not cautiously, dismissively. He didn't act like a man trying to figure out whether the ID was real. He acted like a man who had already decided it wasn't. That was the first serious mistake. Plenty of officers verify credentials they haven't seen before. That part isn't the issue. The issue is how he handled it. He skipped straight past neutral procedure and went into accusation. He treated the badge wallet as a prop. He talked to Cole like the entire scene had already been solved. Bodycam later became a huge problem for him because it showed the change in tone almost immediately. He wasn't weighing possibilities. He was building a case out loud before dispatch finished doing its job. Cole stayed controlled. That helped him later. He kept his hands visible. He answered what he needed to answer. He didn't argue on the roadside because he understood what too many people learned the hard way. Once an officer turns a stop personal, winning the argument in the moment usually isn't the goal. Surviving the moment is. Garrison didn't see calm professionalism. He saw resistance because that's what he wanted to see. He started focusing on the SUV itself. He treated the registration issue as proof that the vehicle had to be stolen. That jumped way past the evidence. A mismatch can mean a lot of things. Clerical delay, restricted listing, interagency registration, database limitation. It does not automatically mean grand theft auto. Garrison went there anyway. Dispatch then gave him an easy exit. The returns didn't support a clean, stolen vehicle theory. They showed irregularity, yes, but not confirmation. Then another piece came in. The federal identification Cole had provided began matching an actual employee profile. Again, not the kind of thing that should make a reasonable officer more aggressive. It should make him more careful. Garrison did the opposite. He talked over the radio. He brushed past partial confirmation because it interfered with the version of events he'd already committed himself to. That was the second serious mistake. Once that happened, this stop stopped being about uncertainty. It became about ego. He ordered Cole out of the SUV. Cole complied. That detail mattered. No resistance, no sudden movement, no physical challenge. He stepped out, followed commands, and kept trying to direct the stop toward verification. He explained again that the vehicle was federally assigned. He pointed Garrison back toward the same basic option any competent officer would have taken at that stage. Confirm the assignment through the proper channels. Garrison wasn't interested in slowing down. He was interested in winning the scene. Secondary units began arriving. That changed the temperature right away. More deputies meant more eyes, more body cams, more witnesses, and more pressure on Garrison to either correct himself or go all in. He chose the second option. Deputy Erin Vale was one of the first to realize the stop felt wrong. She saw the federal credentials. She heard enough of the dispatch traffic to know the sheriff was moving faster than the evidence. She also saw Cole's behavior. He wasn't acting like a man improvising his identity under pressure. He was acting like someone who had already lived through enough roadside encounters to know exactly how careful he needed to be. Vale didn't take over. She couldn't. Not with Garrison running the stop, but her hesitation showed. Another deputy, Noah Pike, looked unsure too once the radio traffic got more specific. Neither one wanted to openly challenge the sheriff on the shoulder of a public road. That's how bad departments trap decent people. The rank structure does the silencing for them. Garrison pushed past all of it. He told the deputies to cuff Cole. That was the moment this went from bad judgment to a career-ending event. A sheriff had a compliant black FBI agent on the side of the road, with valid federal credentials already presented, dispatch already signaling that the story didn't add up the way he claimed, and additional officers already showing signs that they knew this was getting out of hand. He still moved to handcuffs. It looked terrible on camera, because there was no clean excuse left by then. He'd had off-ramps, several. He ignored every one. Cole didn't resist the cuffs. He made the smart choice. He preserved the record. He kept telling them the same thing in the same controlled way: federal assignment, federal vehicle, federal verification. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was documenting the disaster in real time by staying steady, while Garrison got more rigid and more defensive. That's when the rest of the deputies really started to understand the scale of the mistake. You could hear it in the slower movements, the broken rhythm, the way nobody except Garrison sounded certain anymore. He was still talking like he had a major arrest. The scene around him no longer matched that confidence. Then the final problem started forming in the background. Someone on the federal side had been notified, not officially yet, not through a press release, not through a court filing, through the channels that matter first. An agent had been detained by a local sheriff after presenting credentials. A bureau vehicle had been called stolen without proper verification. Dispatch audio and Bodycam were already creating a time-stamped record of every bad decision. Garrison still thought he could manage it locally. That was his biggest mistake of the night. He thought this was a county stop with a county ending. It wasn't. By the time Cole stood on that roadside in handcuffs, watched by deputies who were no longer sure they were on the right side of the stop, the damage was already bigger than Pine County. The sheriff just hadn't realized it yet. The stop started falling apart when direct federal verification came in. Jordan Cole was who he said he was. The SUV was a valid federal vehicle. At that point, Wade Garrison had no real case left. He had a compliant FBI agent in handcuffs, valid credentials already shown, and radio traffic that never backed his stolen vehicle claim. Cole was uncuffed. Garrison didn't own the mistake. He tried to soften it. He treated it like a reasonable stop that got complicated. That didn't help him. The cameras already showed he had chances to verify first, and chose escalation instead. Cole didn't argue. He left the scene, documented everything, and contacted his supervisors. That's when the real problem started. Inside the FBI, this wasn't treated like a minor misunderstanding. A local sheriff had detained an agent after being shown federal credentials and given a path to verify them. That triggered immediate review. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, stop reports, unit logs, and plate queries all became important. By the next day, Pine County was dealing with evidence preservation demands in the early stages of a civil rights inquiry. Then Garrison made it worse. Instead of stepping back, he tried to control the record. Reports were pushed through fast. Internal messaging started moving. Some of the paperwork leaned toward justifying the stop instead of honestly describing it. That became a serious problem once investigators compared the written reports to the actual footage. The differences stood out fast. Cole had identified himself. He had shown credentials. He had complied. Garrison had still treated him like a car thief. Some deputies started feeling the pressure right away. Aaron Vale and Noah Pike had both seen enough on scene to know the stop had gone too far. Neither one had stopped it, but neither looked eager to defend it either. That mattered because this case was already growing beyond one bad arrest. Federal investigators weren't just looking at the stop. They were looking at what happened after it. Who changed language in reports? Who accessed footage? Who tried to shape the story once they realized the sheriff had made a major mistake? Then word started leaking out. Local officials heard that the sheriff's office had rushed its internal version before federal investigators locked everything down. Reporters picked up that this might be more than a bad call. Now, the question wasn't only why Garrison arrested Cole. It was whether he tried to cover it up after. That changed the whole case. By the end of the week, Cole was free and back under federal protection. Garrison still had the badge, but he was no longer in control of what came next. Once the feds locked the evidence down, Wade Garrison's problem got bigger. Jordan Cole filed notice to preserve every piece of the stop, not just body cam, dispatch audio, plate checks, unit logs, report edits, supervisor messages. That forced the county to hold everything in place before anyone could clean it up further. Then the lawyers got involved. Cole's legal team didn't build the case around outrage. They built it around sequence. Credentials shown, verification offered, dispatch failing to confirm theft, handcuffs anyway. That sequence was hard to defend. Worse for Garrison, it got even uglier when the attorneys started pulling older stop data from the department. That's where the patterns started showing. Black drivers had been searched more often, detained longer, written up on thinner justification. Some stops ended with nothing. Some complaints went nowhere. A few deputies had raised concerns before, but the office buried them or treated them like attitude problems. Now those old complaints mattered. Federal investigators weren't looking at Garrison as one sheriff who had a bad night. They were looking at whether his office had been running on the same bias for years. Once that happens, every past shortcut becomes evidence. The department started splitting. Some deputies stayed loyal and repeated Garrison's line that the stop had been reasonable until full confirmation came in. Others started backing away, quiet at first, then more clearly in interviews. They knew the video was bad. They knew dispatch didn't support him. And they knew nobody wanted to be the one left defending a lie under oath. That's when the cover-up angle got teeth. Investigators found report language that looked coordinated. Nothing dramatic on its face. Just too polished, too similar, too obviously shaped after the fact. Access logs also showed who reviewed footage before final narratives got filed. That's a major problem when the written version starts sounding less like memory and more like damage control. County officials saw where it was going and started distancing themselves. No one wanted to go down with Garrison over a stop that was already impossible to explain cleanly. Public support around him got thinner, meetings got quieter, statements got cautious. He still had the title, but he was losing the room. Cole, on the other side, got stronger every week. His record stayed clean. His conduct during the stop helped him. Calm, compliant, consistent. Garrison had gambled on making Cole look suspicious. The footage did the opposite. It made Cole look professional and made the sheriff look reckless. By the time depositions started coming together, the case was no longer just about one roadside arrest. It was about whether Wade Garrison's office had been operating like rules were optional until somebody with federal backing forced the issue. That was the point where this stopped looking survivable for him. The final collapse came in stages, then all at once. By 2026, Wade Garrison was no longer fighting one bad stop. He was fighting the stop, the reports, the internal handling, and the pattern evidence that came out after Jordan Cole sued. The court stripped away Garrison's best shield first. Qualified immunity didn't hold. The judge looked at the facts the same way everyone else eventually had to. Cole identified himself. He showed federal credentials. He gave Garrison a clear path to verify them. Dispatch never confirmed a stolen vehicle. Garrison still pushed the stop into handcuffs. That wasn't a close call anymore. Once that ruling landed, the rest got worse. The civil case moved forward with real force. Discovery exposed older complaints, uneven stop patterns, and internal practices that made the sheriff's office look less like a discipline department and more like a shop run on habit, ego, and selective enforcement. Then the obstruction issues hit. Investigators focused on report coordination, post-incident messaging, and how the office handled evidence after federal notice came in. That ended careers. A few supervisors resigned before they were forced out. Others got suspended, then interviewed again when the timeline tightened around them. Garrison lost the political protection he'd counted on. County officials had no reason left to stand near him. He became expensive, toxic, and impossible to defend in public. Then came the structural hit. The county's sheriff's department was stripped of core policing authority and pushed under state-managed oversight while the office was reorganized. Some functions were absorbed, some were reassigned. Some people never got their jobs back. For a department that had acted like nobody could touch it, that was the real humiliation. It didn't just lose a case, it lost control. Garrison's career was finished by then. Not damaged, finished. He lost the badge, the office, and whatever local legend he thought he had built. The footage followed him. The rulings followed him. The federal findings followed him. That's the part people like him never plan for. They think power protects them forever. It usually protects them right up until the record gets too clean to spin. Cole came out of it in a very different position. His professional record was cleared completely. The claim that he had done anything suspicious collapsed under evidence almost immediately once outside review took over. He later won a major settlement against the county, enough to make every local official understand what Garrison's ego had really cost. More important than the money, the case confirmed what Cole had said from the beginning. He had done his job. Garrison had abused his. And the case didn't stay local. Training standards changed. Verification procedures got tightened. More departments were forced to review how officers handled federal credentials, restricted vehicle registrations, and cross-agency contacts during roadside stops. Civil rights lawyers started citing the case as a clean example of what happens when an officer skips procedure, makes race part of the decision whether he admits it or not, and then tries to protect himself by shaping the paperwork after. That's why this story mattered. Not because one sheriff embarrassed himself on camera. That happens all the time. This mattered because the evidence held. The timeline held. The excuses didn't. And once the facts got outside his office, Wade Garrison learned the hard way that local power stops working when every bad decision is recorded, preserved, and reviewed by people who don't work for you. Jordan Cole didn't beat him by making a scene. He beat him by staying steady long enough for the truth to do the damage. That's the whole story. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done in Cole's position once Garrison ignored the credentials and started escalating. And have you ever seen a situation where somebody in authority ruined themselves simply because they refused to admit they were wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with somebody who'd understand it. And subscribe for more stories like this.
Step away from the car right now.
I'm a medic. She's unstable. Give me a second.
I said back
No,
away.
listen to me. She's fading. I need to keep pressure here.
You don't ignore orders on my
Ma'am,
scene.
help me. Don't stop me. Ma'am, stay with me. Keep looking at me. Don't close your eyes.
Move now.
Do not pull me right now. She needs
You're
airway
interfering.
support. I'm the one keeping her breathing.
Can a single arrest destroy a decorated career? When a patrolman interfered with a Navy SEAL medic during a life-or-death emergency, it set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. You won't believe the evidence investigators uncovered after they tore through the footage, the reports, and the witness statements. What started on the shoulder of a wet Virginia highway didn't end as a routine arrest. It ended as a career collapse. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about abuse of power, real consequences, and people who stay sharp when somebody else loses control, hit like and subscribe. This one centered on Chief Hospital Corpsman Darius Cole, a black Navy SEAL medic with years inside the kind of environments where panic gets people killed. He wasn't loud, wasn't reckless. He was the kind of man who assessed first, moved second, and didn't waste words. That mattered because by the time this story started, a woman was bleeding on the pavement, traffic was backing up, and one patrolman was about to make the worst decision of his career. The trouble started just after sunset on a stretch of highway outside Virginia Beach. Roads were slick from earlier rain. Visibility was still decent, but the pavement had that greasy look that made every sudden stop dangerous. Two vehicles had collided hard near the right shoulder. One had spun half sideways. The other had its front end crushed in enough to tell anyone paying attention that this wasn't a minor fender bender. Cole had been driving home when he saw the wreck. He pulled over without hesitation, grabbed a compact trauma kit from the back of his vehicle, and moved in fast. Not rushed. Controlled. Big difference. A few bystanders had already stopped, but they were doing what most untrained people do at a bad crash. Standing too close. Talking too much. Looking at each other for answers nobody had. One woman had called 911 and kept saying the injured driver was fading. Another man kept trying to open a damaged door from the wrong angle and making things worse. Cole took over because somebody had to. He checked the scene, made sure there was no immediate fire risk, then focused on the victim in the worst shape. Lindsay Mercer, mid-40s, semi-conscious. She had visible facial trauma, a deep cut near the scalp line, and signs that worried him more than the bleeding did. Her breathing pattern looked wrong. Her attention drifted in and out. She wasn't tracking properly. That told him this could go south fast. He identified himself as a medic, told the bystanders exactly what he needed, and got them moving. One person directed traffic away from the shoulder. Another held a phone light steady. Another stayed on with dispatch and relayed what Cole found. That's how real scene control works. Not yelling, assignments. Within a minute, he had the victim positioned as safely as possible, pressure controlled on one wound, and his focus on keeping her airway stable while watching for spinal risk. He didn't know how long EMS would take. On roads like that, even a few minutes mattered. And this is where the whole thing turned. The first patrol unit arrived before fire rescue. That by itself wasn't unusual. A lot of accident scenes start with law enforcement securing traffic before medics fully take over. The problem wasn't the arrival. It was the read. Patrolman Brent Holloway stepped out of his cruiser and saw a black man in civilian clothes leaning into a damaged vehicle with blood on his hands and a medical kit open on the ground. Instead of taking 2 seconds to assess what was happening, he came in hot and wrong. He started issuing commands immediately. Step back. Move away from the vehicle. Don't touch anything else. He treated the scene like he had caught somebody interfering, not somebody keeping a victim alive. Cole looked up, kept one hand where it needed to be, and told him he was a Navy SEAL medic rendering emergency aid. He reported it cleanly, no attitude, no challenge, just facts, because facts should have solved this right there. They didn't. Holloway demanded compliance again. Cole responded the same way a disciplined medic would. He explained that the victim needed stabilization and that pulling him off in that moment could make her condition worse. He also said EMS was still en route and that he was maintaining care until they arrived. That should have been enough for any officer with basic judgment. It wasn't enough for Holloway. This was the first real sign of what investigators later focused on. The patrolman wasn't trying to understand the scene. He was trying to dominate it. Big difference. A competent officer arrives, identifies roles, secures the perimeter, and supports life safety. Holloway skipped that and went straight to control for control's sake. Bystanders noticed it too. Phones started to come up, quietly at first. People always sense when something stops looking normal. They could see the injured woman. They could see Cole working. They could hear the patrolman pushing harder than the situation called for. That changed the energy right away. Now there were witnesses watching not just the crash, but the officer. Cole kept working. He told the bystanders to stay calm and keep the victim talking if she could respond. He checked her breathing again. It had gotten weaker. He asked for an ETA from dispatch through one of the witnesses. He was still doing the job. Still focused. Holloway didn't like that. He moved closer and repeated that nobody was going to ignore his commands on his scene. That was the mindset. His scene. His authority. His ego. The injured woman was becoming secondary, and that's the part that later made the footage impossible to defend. Cole tried one more time to get through to him. He identified his training again, told him the victim was unstable, told him he'd step back when qualified responders physically took over. That was measured. Reasonable. Exactly what any sane person would want to hear from someone giving emergency care. Holloway treated it as defiance. He started pressing on identification, asking who Cole thought he was, demanding credentials in the middle of active treatment. Like this was a traffic stop and not a medical emergency. Cole told him where his identification was and why he wasn't taking his hands off the patient to dig for a wallet. Again, sensible. Again, wasted on the wrong man. By then, the phones were fully out. One bystander moved closer from the shoulder and said the medic had been there first and was helping. Another said the victim had nearly stopped responding before Cole stabilized her. Holloway shut that down too. He didn't want input. He wanted submission. That was the mistake. Not the last one, the first big one. Because now there was Bodycam running, multiple civilian recordings, and a growing group of witnesses seeing an officer choose a power struggle over obvious medical reality. Once that happens, a bad decision doesn't stay local. It travels. Cole leaned back in, checked the victim again, and adjusted his pressure placement as her breathing shifted. He told Holloway one more time that if he wanted to help, he needed to keep the scene clear and let medical care continue. Clean, direct, professional. Holloway stepped forward anyway. He reached down toward Cole's shoulder while the medic was still working over the victim. Patrolman Brent Holloway reached for Darius Cole's shoulder while Cole was still holding pressure and watching the injured woman's breathing. Cole told him he was in the middle of active medical care and that pulling him away could make her worse. He said it plainly. He did not raise his voice. He did not turn it into an argument. He just kept working and explained the risk. Holloway did not stop. He ordered Cole to step back immediately. Cole answered that the woman was unstable and needed a few more seconds before he could safely let go. That should have ended it. Any officer with common sense would have recognized what was happening, secured traffic, and let the trained medic do his job until fire rescue arrived. Holloway made it personal instead. He kept pressing on authority. He acted like Cole's calm tone was disrespect. He demanded identification right there, while Cole still had both hands occupied with the victim. Cole told him where his identification was and why he was not about to take his hands off an injured woman to reach into his pocket. That answer was reasonable. Holloway treated it like refusal. The people standing around could see exactly what was happening. They had already watched Cole take control of a messy crash scene and turn it into something organized. He had directed bystanders, protected the victim, and kept her from being moved the wrong way. Then Holloway arrived and started turning the whole scene into a power fight. That was when more phones came out. One woman filming from the shoulder said Cole had been the only person there who knew what he was doing. Another bystander said the victim had started fading before Cole stabilized her. Holloway shut them down too. He did not want information. He wanted compliance. Then he escalated again. He grabbed Cole harder and ordered him away from the vehicle. Cole tried to finish one critical step before moving. He was still focused on the woman. He kept explaining that she needed support and pressure maintained until paramedics took over. Holloway yanked him back anyway. The woman's body shifted when Cole was pulled off balance. A bystander shouted. Another person moved forward, then stopped when Holloway started threatening people at the edge of the scene. That was the moment the entire stop changed. Up to then, Holloway could still have claimed he misunderstood what he saw. The second he physically removed a medic from an injured woman who was actively being treated, that excuse started falling apart. Cole did not fight him. That mattered later. He did not swing, shove, or posture. He kept telling Holloway the same thing. The woman needed care. He kept trying to give medical information even while Holloway forced his arm behind his back. Holloway pushed him toward the shoulder, bent his wrist, and handcuffed him while the victim was still inside reach of the open trauma kit. That image did damage before any investigation even began. A trained black military medic on the roadside, hands behind his back, while the woman he had been helping was left without him for no good reason. People did not need legal analysis to understand how bad that looked. They could see it. And Holloway kept talking. His body camera captured the whole shift in tone. He dismissed Cole's military and medical background instead of checking it. He talked like nobody at the scene had the right to act unless he approved it first. He framed Cole as a problem because Cole had not instantly stepped aside when ordered. That was his whole logic. Not danger, not confusion, not safety. Obedience. That body camera footage later wrecked him. Cole stayed seated on the shoulder after Holloway cuffed him. He kept asking whether someone was maintaining the woman's airway and bleeding control. Even then, he was still focused on the victim. That is what made Holloway look even worse. Cole was not trying to save himself first. He was trying to get the officer to stop making the medical situation worse. Then fire rescue arrived. Fire Captain Elena Ruiz came in with her crew and saw the problem immediately. An injured woman was still in the vehicle, and the person in handcuffs next to the road had medical gloves on, blood on his hands, and a trauma kit open on the ground. That is not a hard scene to read. Paramedic Josh Levin went straight to the victim. Ruiz took one look at Cole, then at Holloway, and understood that somebody had interrupted active care. The response from the medical side was immediate. Levin picked up where Cole had been forced to stop. Ruiz started asking what happened. Holloway tried to present it as scene interference and failure to follow orders. That version did not hold up for even a minute. The bystanders were already speaking over each other, all telling the same story. Cole had stopped to help. Cole had identified himself as a medic. Cole had been treating the woman before Holloway arrived. Holloway had pulled him away anyway. Ruiz and Levin could see the treatment pattern for themselves, the way the victim had been positioned, the supplies laid out, the pressure controls set up. None of it looked random. None of it looked unsafe. It looked like professional emergency care. Levin later stated that Cole's actions before the arrest were medically appropriate and likely helped keep the woman from getting worse before emergency medical services took over. That statement became a major problem for Holloway later because it moved the case out of the area of simple bad judgment and into something more serious. He had not just been rude. He had interfered with necessary care. Cole sat there in handcuffs while trained responders finished the work he should have been allowed to continue. He still did not give Holloway what he seemed to want. No outburst, no threats, no dramatic scene. Just short answers and repeated concern for the patient. That also mattered. Bad officers often count on the other person losing control. It makes the paperwork easier. It gives them something to point to later. Holloway did not get that. He got a composed service member with a clean record, a roadside full of witnesses, and a body camera footage that did not match the story he was already starting to build in his head. The mood at the scene turned fast once the ambulance left. The crash itself was no longer the center of attention. The arrest was. People stayed behind to give names and statements. Several said they had the whole thing on video and would send it out that night. Holloway still acted like he could manage the narrative because he had the badge, the handcuffs, and the first report. He was wrong. Cole had the truth on camera. The bystanders had angles his body camera did not. The medical responders had professional opinions Holloway could not talk over. And once all of that left the roadside, the case stopped belonging to him. That night, Patrolman Brent Holloway wrote the first report. He claimed Darius Cole interfered with the scene, refused orders, and forced the arrest. He leaned on the usual wording: noncompliance, officer safety, obstruction. The problem was simple. The videos did not support him. By the end of the night, bystander clips were already online. People saw the same sequence in every version. A Black Navy SEAL medic stopped at a crash, treated an injured woman, identified himself, and got arrested while she still needed help. The department could not sit on it. The next morning, the case went to Internal Affairs Lieutenant Naomi Price. She pulled the full file right away: body camera video, civilian videos, dispatch audio, the written report, witness statements, fire rescue statements, use of force paperwork. Then she compared everything. That is where Holloway started sinking. His report described Cole like a disruptive civilian, creating problems at an active scene. The video showed the opposite. Cole was already treating the victim before Holloway arrived. He kept the bystanders organized. He identified himself as a medic more than once. He stayed focused on the victim the whole time. Holloway arrived and turned it into a control issue. The body camera hurt him badly. It showed Cole explaining why he could not stop treatment in that moment. It showed Holloway ignoring that explanation. It showed Holloway escalating fast instead of assessing the situation first. The civilian videos made it worse. One angle showed Cole working before the patrol car even stopped. Another showed bystanders telling Holloway that Cole was helping. Another caught the moment Holloway pulled him away from the victim. Taken together, the footage removed doubt. This was not confusion. It was bad judgment followed by force. Then the medical responders gave statements. Fire Captain Elena Ruiz stated that Cole had clearly been providing competent emergency care before fire rescue arrived. She said the scene showed organized treatment, not interference. Paramedic Josh Levin confirmed the same thing. He stated that Cole's actions were medically appropriate and that removing him when Holloway did created unnecessary risk for the victim. That changed the case. Now the issue is not just an aggressive arrest. Holloway had interrupted active care without a valid reason. Price then verified Cole's background: active duty, advanced medical training, clean military record, no conduct problem, no credibility issue. Nothing in his history helped Holloway. After that, Price reviewed department policy. She found several violations. Holloway failed to properly assess the scene before acting. He interfered with emergency aid. He used force on a nonviolent person. He failed to de-escalate. He made a detention that the evidence did not support. Then he wrote a report that did not match the video. That last part mattered a lot. Departments can sometimes explain bad judgment. They have a much harder time explaining video that contradicts an officer's report. The bystanders helped close the gap. Their statements matched on the key points. Cole arrived first. Cole gave aid. Cole identified himself. Holloway escalated. Holloway ignored the medical emergency and focused on control. Price also found that Holloway had prior complaints tied to attitude and escalation. Nothing as large as this case, but enough to show a pattern. He had been warned before about pushing situations too far. At first, the department placed him on administrative leave. That did not last. Once command staff reviewed the footage and responder statements, the case moved fast. The risk to the department was obvious. The facts were too clear. The videos were too public. The medical testimony was too strong. The recommendation changed from review to termination. That happened quicker than usual because there was no real defense left. Holloway did not make a hard decision in a chaotic moment. He made a bad decision, doubled down, used force, and then wrote it up in a way the evidence did not support. Darius Cole did not need to say much. He let the footage speak. He let the medical responders speak. He let Holloway's own body camera do the damage. By the second week, the department was no longer deciding whether Holloway had crossed the line. It was deciding how to cut him loose. The department fired Patrolman Brent Holloway before the month ended. The findings were clear. He interfered with emergency medical care, used force without proper cause, failed to de-escalate, and wrote a report that did not match the video. Then, the state took the next step. Holloway lost his law enforcement certification. That ended his career for good. He was not moving to another department. He was done. Darius Cole was fully cleared. The investigation confirmed he had done exactly what a trained medic should do. He stopped, treated the victim, identified himself, and stayed focused on her condition the entire time. Fire Captain Elena Ruiz and paramedic Josh Levin confirmed that his care was appropriate and that Holloway created unnecessary risk by pulling him away. After that, Cole filed a civil suit. The claims included unlawful detention, excessive force, civil rights violations, and obstruction of emergency aid. The case was not just about a bad arrest. It was about an officer using his authority to stop life-saving care for no valid reason. Lindsay Mercer survived. That helped. It did not excuse what Holloway did. Cole stayed on active duty and returned to service with his record intact. Holloway lost his badge, his certification, and his future in law enforcement. The case also forced changes. The department updated training for officers arriving first at medical scenes. The focus was simple. Assess first. Do not interfere with qualified medical aid unless there's a real safety threat. That is why this case hit so hard. Holloway thought he controlled the scene because he had the badge. He did not. The cameras, the witnesses, and the facts took control away from him. One bad arrest ended a career. What would you have done if you were standing there? Put it in the comments, share the story, and subscribe for more.